Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Volley Tribe podcast. I've got a special guest on the show this week. It's not the guest I was talking about on last week's episode, actually. That's another couple of weeks away. I had to push that one back and rearrange things a little bit. But I am really, really excited about this conversation. Joining me today is one of the very few English coaches that is coaching abroad or about to start coaching abroad. There's not very many in the world, so it's really, really cool that I've been able to get this person on to the show. Welcome to the Volley Tribe podcast, George Frazer, new women's head coach at DHV Odense in Denmark. How you doing?
Yeah, thank you very much. Buzzing to be here.
So we're going to talk a little bit today about kind of coaching in a high performance environment with women. I also want to kind of get some of your experience from playing abroad as well, and ask some of the questions and maybe answer some of your questions that are things that are bugging you or bothering you about going into this environment now. Coaching abroad, coaching in Denmark. Yeah, it's a new club, a new country for you that you haven't been in before during your volleyball career, but kind of similar to when you played in Sweden, right? They're similar nations culturally, so you've got some experience, but not that locked-in experience. What's the thing that most excites you about getting this opportunity to coach in Denmark?
Well, don't know that. I mean, that's a good question. I think probably the thing that excites me most is getting to see the same players this often. I feel like it's quite a unique experience. So like the last season I had after I was in Sweden for 2 years, I went 3 years ago, if that makes sense. So last year I came back to the UK and I was coaching full time in Leeds. I was part of the junior program there and working with the unis as well. And it was a great year. I really enjoyed it, but it's obviously very different in that setup with junior. You're still seeing each team once, maybe twice a week. And like obviously some of the players overlap between age groups and stuff, but it's just not quite the same as having one team, the same group of like 14, 15 people, and you're seeing them like 5-6 times or more, probably in your case at Essex, a week. I feel like you have such more opportunity to sort of be creative and try things out, just generally. And like you have way much more freedom to get stuck in as a coach. You're going to learn a lot more, I think, as well. Like you get better relationships with the players. It's not something I've experienced before as a coach, only obviously as a player.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point that you've kind of focused in on there about being able to be more creative when you have more time. And I think that's the number one issue that I've come across on this podcast. We try and push some very different ideas in terms of coaching. As my dog is going absolutely mental in the room next to us, and apologies for that, people. But yeah, we're trying to push some very, very different ideas on what sports coaching means and volleyball coaching means. And if you're a coach that only has one session a week, it can be quite tough to change what you're doing if you know it kind of works and it's kind of helping your team get better.
Yeah.
To completely change that style and do something very different, that's a big jump that you have to take. And like you say, having that a little bit more time, a little bit more consistency in who's attending as well, right? Because you're gonna have the positive of what your squad is, and I'm assuming that everyone in your squad's being paid at least a little bit to play, even if they're sort of semi-pro local athletes.
Yeah, well,
so you've got that thing them having to turn up, right?
No, definitely. Like, I mean, in our team specifically, like, I don't think anyone's on. Well, no one's being paid, like apart from me, to be there. So it's and that was the same when I was in Uppsala. Like the top leagues in Sweden and Denmark, they're pretty split. So the top few teams will have like predominantly professional rosters, like not fully, because I don't know actually Denmark. I know in Sweden you have to have a certain number of Swedish players on court. I imagine it's the same here. So you can't have a fully pro roster because you couldn't play them all. And then like maybe half the teams in the league will have a handful of pro players, whether it's a couple of foreigners or they'll just be paying some Swedish players or some native players. But then you get some fully amateur teams that are just competing. And we're one of those this season. So, but it is still the case. Like your point still stands, right? That they've all agreed to be there, right? We're signing a contract to turn up. And you don't get someone's just, I just wasn't there today, or like, I was hungover, so I just didn't come, or something. Like, it was really tough when planning with the juniors, or especially with the uni students, that they've obviously, it's not their biggest commitment, or it's not even their second biggest commitment. So you make your plan for the session, and then like none of the setters turn up or something, and you're like, oh well, there goes playing 6-on-6, as planned at least. So yeah, it's definitely much easier to plan. I also think as well, like when you have more time, the other reason you can be more creative for me is that there's almost less pressure on the sessions being really, really like perfect. I feel like especially if you're playing like a Div 3 NBL team and you're like a 30-year-old with kids sort of thing, yeah, you want to get better, you want to win, but you also want to just go and have to play some fun volleyball, right? It's not quite the same as when it's like a performance environment. You're going to be a bit more sympathetic if the coach tries something new and it doesn't work. You're not going to be like, oh, well, why couldn't we have just played? Like, because that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance, right? You want to focus your environment down as much as you can, but you also don't want to lose that ability for it to look like the game.
Yeah.
Right? It should stay looking like volleyball. And that might be 4v4 and the ball's traveling over the net and you're hyper focused on this one area of serve and block defense, right? But I think the ability to go into that level of detail is not something you'll be able to do if you've only got 1-2 hour session a week. Yeah, having that more time, you can really drill down into how you want the team to play and what you want them to do. Whereas if you've got limited time, it's pointless. You might as well just really focus on, this is 6v6 and this is how we're going to play in that environment. You're still going to get the touches, you're still going to get the opportunities to play, but also those athletes are going to learn a lot more about how to play the game by living in 6v6. So I agree. I think that's going to be a big thing for you stepping up. Are you ready for the extra workload that comes with having 4 sessions a week, probably at least, for you guys this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess time will tell. I hope so. I'm lucky in that, like, my position where I am living here, like how we've sort of set up to plan our lives, and that I'm not taking on another job. So like I have, I earn a little bit of money from doing other things within volleyball online. So like I make some YouTube videos about my like experience playing and coaching. I get a bit of money from that. Offer online coaching as well. People get in touch, and that pays a decent bit. But then also just like I'm super lucky I'm here with my partner Meg, who's a chef, and so she'll be working like full time, and that will help us out so that I can afford to spend more time, because I'm getting paid for this coaching, but it's not enough to live off at all, right? Like given the size of the club I'm at, but so unfortunately I should have the time to be able to put in. But I mean, this leads on to one of the questions I actually want to ask you, like when you're planning, right? So I have loads of ideas about things I want to work on, seeing the team play, like, okay, we need to get better at this, and we're not good enough at that. But then I'm aware that's great, now we're in pre-season and it feels like we kind of have infinite time, but then we'll play a match and it'll a genuine test of a proper game, and then suddenly half of that goes out the window because you realize there's all these things you hadn't assessed. Like, how do you balance your sort of long-term goals of like, I want to develop these skills, to sort of putting out fires that come up after playing games? And yeah,
it's an interesting one. So for us, we're quite lucky in England that we have a very long pre-season. The league starts really late.
Yeah.
Doesn't start till the middle of October. So, I probably have a month before the start of the Super League to work with my athletes every day. So we can really install a lot of how we want to play in those first 5 weeks. But most of that is done in this idea of principles of play, right? And they're relatively abstract, and leave some space for the athletes to kind of fill and build their own group. And I kind of just try and guide them towards that. It's even tougher for you because you've never seen any of your athletes. So coming in with too much of an idea of how you want the team to play without ever really seeing them play is quite a tough position to be in, because you can't do too much planning on day one. For me, I'd keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
early on. Maybe if you can speak to someone at the club who knows the group, whoever recruited the team or put the team together, try and get a list of what they're good at and what they're not good at. What kind of tempo are they used to playing at offensively, and they're the bits, and then shore up the bits that are the same kind of the world over. You're going to have to pass well to play. You're going to want to be in system quite a lot of the time. So for me, the bits that don't change every year are the kind of goals when we're trying to keep the ball on our side of the net, and somewhat how we want to play. My teams are pretty well known being really aggressive serving teams. That's what we've built our sort of stable around the last few years, is we tried to be the best serving team out there.
Yeah.
That's an easy thing because you control that skill. Nothing outside of the court affects that skill. It's both a team and an individual skill. You can be a really good serving team and have really good servers and not be a great serving team still. So that, to me, that's the number one. Go in, right, we're going to serve really well. And then I have an idea of how I want to try and play. And I'm lucky I'm in the position where I recruit the team that I get to coach.
Yeah.
So I can recruit players that kind of fit my style and are going to work well together. Going into a professional environment or a really high-level amateur environment like you are, you don't have a say over who's in your squad. You kind of have to just roll with it and go. So I think a lot of it's going to be go and see the first week, kind of what you have. You can put some easy ideas in place, and I think once you get to know that team a lot more, then you can really start to put the plans in place. Now, we do adjust what we do, so we have our way of playing, and then there are certain bits that we will adjust depending on our opponent, and we can't start that until we get video on the teams that we're playing. Yeah. One of the big things going into opening weekend, we did it last year. Last year was a little bit easier because the Leeds roster, the team we were playing against, I knew a lot of those players. They'd been around the Super League for a long time. We knew a lot about their tendencies. Coming in now, we're playing the same opponent this year, but that roster could look very, very different based on some player and personnel changes. Yeah. And it's going to be quite a tough scout for us to put together because we'll have no film on them going into the game. And I think a lot of that is just trying to be the best we can be and playing some of the percentages and some of the averages that exist within our sport.
Yeah. I don't know if you might not remember, I was actually there when you played Leeds last year. I was on the Leeds bench just doing some stats. But I remember the game well. Like we talked about when you said, like it struck. You reminded me when you just talked just now of being a strong serving team. That was like my biggest takeaway from that game was that like if you were to sum the game with one thing, I feel like it was that Essex served Leeds off the court. Like we said really early on, like it looks like a very deliberate tactic because I hadn't seen Essex women play before. Obviously, I hadn't watched a ton of volleyball when I was in Uppsala. But yeah, that you were really, really going after the serves and like accepting that occasionally you'll get a string of errors because it was so worth it for the number of aces or how much time Leeds spent out of system just chucking up high balls to four. Yeah, so like when you work on serving right, because obviously the players that you get technically coming in, obviously a lot of them from the States and stuff are going to be very good. Like I would assume, obviously correct if I'm wrong, when you're seeing them working on serving and training, you're not massively spending time on their technique like maybe you would be with juniors. It's more trying to practice, improve them serving under pressure or serving to spots, or is that the sort of thing? Like, how are you practicing without giving away too much of the secret sauce for Essex? Like, what does a serving drill look like when you have players that good, where you don't have to teach them footwork and chuck the ball in front?
So a lot of what we do is about serving tactically and serving to a spot and being able to hit multiple different spots on court at different times. So one of the biggest things that we look to do when we practice and when we're pulling that together, I like to use what we call chains of that come across a volleyball court. So, we always chain together serve in and block defense. So you're never just going to stand there and serve. You've got to serve and then come on and play some defense as a team, because you want things to start, and when you progress up to this level, things link together tactically. So, if we're trying to serve short into zone 2. This isn't actually one of our tactics before anyone gets excited. This is definitely a Mallory Eagles tactic. Jeff loves this. Serving short into sort of zone 2, the top of zone 1, to try and jam up the setter and take out their middle as much as possible. We might then shift our block over to the outside. Okay, we're going to try and shut down their outside hitter and shift our defense around it. That's all good if you've got a setter or a server that can drop the ball into zone 2. But there's no point just practicing dropping the ball into zone 2 and not doing the rest of it, because you can talk about doing the rest of it all you like, but you've got to actually practice it, and then you've got to have someone on the other side trying to break away from that tactic and do something different, so that when you come into a game, if the opposition's ready and prepared for it and they've got a counter, then you've got a counter yourself to their counter. It gets to a very, very high level of, there's only so much you can control on the coaching side of it, and it's more a case of, can I put them into positions over and over again that give them solutions that they can call back to in the game. And some of the stuff we do with our first years coming in is a case of, get the toss up in front, get the elbow back early, be rhythmic in your approach, and play. So there is an element of that, but it will all be encased in this tactical serve to this spot to then trigger event X, Y, Z.
So even if you're working with someone to sort of groove their technique, it would still be, it's never just go and hit like 20 serves, working on getting your elbow back. It would always be like serve and then go play block defense, or like.
In an ideal world, yes, but also athletes exist. So if an athlete tells me they want to come back and serve 20 times, I'm probably going to let them, because it's going to make them feel good.
Yeah.
And when you feel good, you play good. Really, really simple. So there's a balancing element of what the best is for their development and coaching science, but also there's the art side of it of, if this athlete feels like they need to go and get 50 serving reps, you go ahead. But we're lucky we have the time that we can do that.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and for most clubs that don't own their own venue, and you've only got 2 hours of practice or 4 hours of practice a week, then you, as a coach, are probably going to have to take a little bit more of an onus and a responsibility on what that environment looks like in those 4 hours that you have. Now, when you chain together different actions, you can have multiple people working at the same time on different things and keeping it fresh and moving and rotating people through.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, talk to me about your experience a little bit in Sweden when you were out there as an athlete. What kind of stood out as the main differences between playing in Sweden and playing in England?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most obvious difference, or just off the bat, is that the level's like just a bit higher than in Sweden in the Super League. Like the very best players playing in Sweden have played. There's one guy that played VNL, quite a few have played Champions League. And there's obviously not too many people in the UK who have played that. Obviously that there are some, especially some foreign guys, but like, and volleyball kind of generally is just a bigger sport. So obviously when you're in volleyball in the UK, it feels like you get to know everyone and so on. But like, it's obviously when you go and speak to someone, I'm sure you have this all the time. If you speak to someone, what do you do? Like, I'm a professional volleyball coach. And they're like, what? Like, that's a thing. I thought volleyball was just playing on the beach sort of thing. And that didn't really ever happen in Sweden. Everyone sort of knew. So just day to day, it was kind of a nicer sport to be involved in with respect to that. But I mean, one thing that was interesting performance wise, like I thought, I wasn't expecting at that high level, but it was quite different, was the culture of players. It was a lot, I don't want to say less competitive, but I guess the nice way of saying it would be less toxic, and the critical way of saying it would be less competitive. Like the vibe of players at our club, but also more generally, was just less confrontational. Like, and we had some trouble with a player who that was just clashed with people, basically, who was from Australia, and obviously like way more sort of aggressive sense of humor and so on, which for me and the other English guy there, I think we didn't really think much of. Wouldn't have stood out as a strange character in the UK at all, but he really rubbed a lot of the guys up the wrong way, and they just didn't gel. And eventually I think he had to leave. But I found that really, really interesting, that the culture could change so much from places. But I kind of figure once you get to elite sport, even if the culture of the UK and Sweden is different, once you get like that high level sports enough of a filter, that everyone's going to be hyper competitive. Like, and don't get me wrong, they were obviously right. They're playing sport to a really high level, but I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to agree with you, and I think you see it in one or two environments here in England now, but less so than you would in a country like Sweden, where it's a little bit more ingrained in volleyball. This performance culture, motivation is a myth, right? Especially when you get to that level, everyone's motivated. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't be that good. And I think there's a big kind of standard with it of, everyone kind of respects everyone at that top level, because to get there, they have to be, then, people know and the athletes know what you've had to go through to get there. I think the problem we have a lot in our league right now is that you don't actually have to sacrifice all that much to get onto a Super League roster, right? And I think that at the top level you do. So you look at the top 4 or 5 teams across the leagues, and there's that similar camaraderie, that similar culture element. But at the bottom end of the league, where teams aren't recruiting, they're just taking whoever's local. And you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place there. If someone came into our gym and wasn't a good person, we could get rid of them to a point. There's some elements where I can't, but most I can tell them to leave the program. And in a lot of pro clubs, it's the same. Like you go there and you cause problems, like you said, you're gone. They just cut your contract early and send you home at Christmas. So there's an element of that not being there in some of the Super League teams. I think there's that, as you say, that conflict of, I want to be the best player here, I'm going to go and fight and step on other people to make it to the top. And it does happen at the pro level, I'm sure, but that people are a lot more at ease with what their role is on the team.
I think there's way more of a shared understanding at that level, that when you're playing professionally or adjacent, that everyone's there probably for more or less the same reasons. Whereas in a good English team that's in like the bottom Super League, top of Division, or whatever it is, or I mean any level really, you could have some people who are there and they really, really want to work hard. They want to play national team. They want to play for a top team, and other people who are sort of just playing for a bit of fun. And it can be really hard, especially for a coach, to how do you set the vibe in training, and like how competitive is it? How much do you hold people to account for punctuality, for all this stuff, when you've got someone working like full-time job, and you've got who's like doing his best and just wants a bit of fun, but is also really good. Right? So you can't then just chuck them out. But then you've got the junior who's like super committed, there an hour early, getting extra reps and so on. Like I don't envy people trying to balance that. I always found it frustrating when I came, because I went to uni at Sheffield, so I was part of I was at uni but I was part of the Hallam's program with Keith. And so obviously the environment there was like, high performance expectations, got to meet them, so on and so on. Everyone's working hard. And then I go home to Norwich for Christmas, and Norwich have always been a Div 3 or Div 2 team. And like the vibe's obviously so different. And I'll be like pulling my hair out in training, being like, I can't cope. Like, why is no one's going for the ball? But then no one cares. No one's angry that no one went for the ball. And like, I'm about to explode, but then I look like a dick because no, you know what I mean? And so I definitely, but as you say, you still get those teams and they can play at that, but then play to a really good level.
I think there's a really good mutual understanding between the athletes and the coaches and the athletes. So the athletes themselves will spend a lot more time with one another at that level, and they get to know one another a lot better. They get to understand a lot more about one another's lives. And probably my number one tip for coaches that are only coaching 4 hours a week is to implement right at the start of your session something that allows your athletes to get to know one another as people as much as possible. 5-10 minutes can be during your warm-up, but you have to almost force them to do it. And then you as a coach, you have to be there early to every session. If you've only got 2 sessions a week, you have to be turning up 20-30 minutes early, and then making sure you're prepped. So then that 15 minutes before the session and the first 10 minutes while they're warming up, you're going around and having little conversations with everyone there. You've got to get to know and show you care about your athletes as people, and then they'll put the extra effort in, and they'll listen to you, and they'll want to work for you that bit more. With the guy that's been on a building site all day and is absolutely knackered by the time he gets to training, if you show him you care about him a little bit as a person, or them as a person, they'll go and they'll put that extra effort in during the training session. Right? They might not have it. They might be absolutely shattered from a day's work. Right? And you have to be able to empathise with that, and you have to teach your other athletes to empathise with that as well. I like to talk with my athletes about how I'll never treat them equally, but I'll always treat them fairly. Because the athlete that's doing a 1-year master's in data science and is sitting in labs all day and has class for 8 hours on a Tuesday before we practice, I'm probably going to give them a little bit more leeway than someone who's got an hour of class in the morning and then they're free all day. Right? And that flips the other way when that athlete that only has an hour of class has a really busy Friday and the first athlete is really free on a Friday. So getting to know as much about your athletes as you can, about their personal circumstances, and then being very honest with it. I'm holding you to a higher standard because you can give a higher standard today compared to what the other athletes can do. And I think as long as you're open about it and you give that athlete the opportunity early on in the year to say, I'm not quite ready to be held to that standard yet. And you, again, honest with them, okay, but it might mean that you're not going to get better to the point where you can play a lot this year. And just having those open conversations and making them two-way conversations is really, really important.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I've always found coaches that have been transparent with me as a player. It's like helped. I've enjoyed and been more motivated in those teams by far. When I can just say to the coach, like, oh, okay, I didn't play today. Like, can I ask, like, what do I need? What do you need to see from me to get on court? And they're excited that I'm asking. They welcome it and they'll explain and stuff. Versus you go and I've had other coaches where I speak to them, ask them the same question. You can tell they don't want to hear it, and they're just like, obviously maybe I'm phrasing it badly, right? But it feels like they think I'm like challenging their authority or something, and it's like I just want to get better because I want to play. With that, how open are you with players? Like, how much do you hold back, or are you pretty willing to be, if players are asking you this sort of stuff? Like, are you fully transparent, or?
There's definitely a balancing act with it. I try and keep it as vague as possible. So there's like 3 or 4 different scenarios here. Some athletes, they want to just come and dump and rant at you, and it's really, really hard to do, but sometimes you just got to let them come and rant, and then 20 minutes later they're like, oh, I'm really sorry, I went overboard there. Sometimes they are really almost worried about where they're at, and so they're coming to ask what they need to do to get better. And most of the time the answer is just keep going, keep your focuses, make sure you're working on those goals that we've spoken about every practice, and you'll get there. But eventually everyone else is getting better around you, so it is a longer process. I try not to be, say, too specific with it. So if I turn around to the backup outside and I'm like, if you pass a 2.6 in practice, you're gonna play, because then they go and they have the session of their life and they pass a 2.6, and it's still not in the best interest of the team for me to start them in the next game. I try and avoid too many statistical conversations as well, because again, your team on paper, your starting 7 might be different to the starting 7 that in your gut is the best team and the team that plays best together. But I'll be very honest about that being the reason. I'll be like, look, this is the team that plays best as a 7, and they're on court. We speak a lot at the start of the year about what decisions and selection processes are going to look like, and kind of the conversations I am and I'm not willing to have. There's got to be some respect for the position, right? My job is to go in and select the team and put them into the best places to be. and that's my role. And yes, I will take advice and guidance, but it won't necessarily always come to pass if you have an
Yeah.
idea. By the same token, if an athlete finds a way to win the game without following the game plan, I'm probably not going to be too mad about it. We might have a conversation about, right, it worked this time, why did it work? Okay, next time we still need to look back at the plan, look at the scout, and kind of play in that team role. But I'm not someone who goes absolutely mental if we don't follow the plan directly to it. Now, my plans are not super in depth anyway, because there's only so much information athletes can hold
Yeah.
in their brains. There's no point overloading them. So like there's lots of different kind of elements to it. I wish there was an easy answer, but there isn't. There's not like a set answer of you have to do things this way to be successful.
No, I mean, that makes sense. Like,
What's your plan? What's your plan moving forward this year? Again, like you don't know your group, so it's kind of hard for me to kind of drop that on you here. But what are your thoughts on those conversations?
well, I mean, so we actually started a bit earlier. So we had the first like normal training session yesterday. We had an interesting experience. I had to run trials. So because it's a club with a really big junior program, and most of the players are sort of homegrown. So, like for me, it was odd coming into like this environment, and it wasn't like, oh, contracts were signed in like May to sign the team. It was like, oh, here's like 20 players, and they're actually all really good, and there's very little to choose between them. Especially, okay, yeah, the first like 6, 7, 8 players obviously stand out, but the difference between players like 13, 14 and 15, 16 in the squad is like, it's nothing. And so I've already had to have quite a lot of those difficult conversations with like saying, I don't know, like it's a trial, like a week's training sessions is a very imperfect way to choose between you. Like I can only create so many approximations of a game condition of like putting you under pressure, to see, yeah, okay, you've got better passing technique, but like, how do you cope when it's like match point down and you've got to take half the court or something? Like it's hard to stimulate that in training, and then to judge them, and maybe they just happen to have a bad day or something, and then they're cut, and actually they're the better player. So I tried to be really upfront and sort of show some vulnerability that like I'm not omniscient, I'm not going to get this, I might cock this up and I might pick the wrong player. So I reserve the right to change my mind, and people can move between squads as we get into the season if necessary. And you'd be welcome to talk to me as well, and not challenge the decision and come and say like, you're wrong, put me in the team, but like we can have a chat about why I made it, and that might help me. Like, so I try to be, just be honest, to be honest, like with them. And then I think that in my experience, people have responded well to that, as opposed to pretending like I know what I'm doing if actually I don't. Because there's like, obviously the risk you run is you kind of undermine your own authority, right? And players start to think they can walk all over you. But I think as long as you're clear with boundaries, and you do also do a decent job in general, and you're showing that you're putting the work in, then showing a bit of vulnerability with players that actually, yeah, we're losing, I don't know why. Like, any ideas? And let's solve this together. Like, I mean, you've talked loads about this on the podcast, right? About encouraging your athletes to problem solve and so on. So being open, so that they're getting them out of the habit of just something's going wrong, and they just look to the coach and just expect you to just have the answer on a plate and say, well, I'm not sure. Like, you guys are the ones playing. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a classic English volleyball thing, right? You make a mistake and immediately turn and look at the coach on the bench. We've actually banned, so we're working with the U19 England girls right now, and we banned them from doing that. They look at us after a mistake, and we'll tell them to turn right back around and go play. And it worked. It started to work really well when we were out in Croatia. The first 2 days were really rough. We played some really good teams and we struggled. And then we had a few emotional moments in there as well. And we kind of just said, no, we're not putting up with that. We're here to play. And we're here to do a job and be professional. And it was quite harsh, and it was delivered quite bluntly. But then the caring side came afterwards. So it's not a case of, and the tone of voice doesn't have to go above kind of the tone that we're speaking in now. but it's a very matter of fact, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to get massively over emotional on things. You've got to go out and work through it. And then once we worked through it, we were great towards the end of the tournament, and we played really, really well. I think that's a really key thing. Like you say, you've got to have those boundaries. You've got to have those lines that can't be crossed. And you've got to have that ability to turn around and go, I like the idea, thanks for bringing it to me, but we're not going to do that because X, Y, and Z. And we've had that in the past, especially you talk about us and serving. Early in the season, we'll miss loads. We'll miss 5, 6 a set at times because we're being super aggressive with how we serve. And I can tell you for sure that in about mid-November, one of my one-year postgrad Americans will come and sit down and go, we need to get more serves in. I'll be like, yeah, we do. But we're not going any safer. Yeah. We're going to stick with it. And I think we missed in Bucks final this year. We swept Durham. I think we missed 6 serves in the whole game. And that is why we serve the way we do throughout the year, and we stay super aggressive from the start. And you have to be able to draw those lines in the sand and go, no, this is the way we're playing. This is what we believe. Now, you've got to change some stuff at times. You're going to, as you say, you're not going to get everything right. And you've got to be willing, when you see it go wrong, you've got to be willing to change very quickly. And I will do that, and I'll put my hands up in the middle of the session and go, this idea didn't work. Let's move on, and we'll go to X.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that from coaches when I'm playing. Like when they can just, because I've had that as a coach, right? You start your drill and it's not working, and you feel like a doofus, and you're like, if I just admit that it's not worked, I'll look bad, and you're just like, please, maybe it'll just get better, and you can tell it won't, and you just like it really, I think it says a lot when a coach can just pull the plug. Or even in games, I had that once this season with Leeds Uni when we were playing the playoffs against Loughborough, and like I made the double sub with the setter and opposite because I just had it in my head. Normally it was a good sub for us, like we got good return on it. And like our opposite wasn't very much of a threat on a 10, and the setters were much for muchness. So I thought, yeah, why not? And then just like the last 2 points before we did it, the opposite just suddenly, he just was unstoppable, and he killed, like he was hitting better than he'd hit his whole life. But I just unthinkingly still made the sub. And it's like, because I just decided to do it. And then as soon as we were off, and he came walk to me and was like, why have you brought me off? Like, I'm on fire. I'm like, yeah, no, you are. Good question. Like, that was a mistake. So then we reversed the sub. And it's like, I felt like such an idiot to like make a sub and then in the next point just undo it. But yeah, like I felt like in that moment, I was like, okay, no, that's like growth, right? To be able to just admit, like, it doesn't matter that I feel stupid, make the right decision. And yeah, it's actually better. Like, you're showing you're a better coach because you can hold your hands up than pretending you didn't make a mistake.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And your athletes will respect you a hell of a lot more for putting your hands up and saying, yeah, I got that one wrong, than trying to persevere with it. You've also, you need to remember as coaches, the majority of the time, you care about this way more than the athletes do. The athletes care a lot about their own performance and getting the option to come and play, but they're not going to be thinking about this little thing that went wrong 20 minutes after the session. They'll move on very, very quickly. As coaches, we kind of linger because we weren't there in the middle of it. And it comes back to that idea that you feel like everyone's looking at you the entire time. And really they're not. They've all got a million things going on in their brains, and they just want to come and play some volleyball in the session. So you can kind of be a little bit less self-conscious about things and more just problem solving in the way you go about it. That's also why a lot of the time when I plan, and for a long time I was quite self-conscious about this in terms of planning. I do plan, but we don't plan super in depth what we're doing. So we'll have like, this is what we're going to work on for the week. This is what we need to do to beat our opponent. This is kind of 3 or 4 things that we might do in practice this week to get there. And then 10 minutes before practice, I'll decide, right, this is how we're going to do what we're doing. And I'll have, like I said, I'll have 5 or 6 things, potential 6v6 variations or 4v4 variations that we're going to work on. But then I only really finalise it in that moment before practice when I'm writing up our plan on our whiteboard. And some people it works to be really in depth with what you're doing, but I often find that practice on a Monday is going to affect what we do on the Tuesday and then what we need to do on the Friday to prepare for the game on the weekend. So we have to be flexible with what we're going to practice and how we're going to practice. People, especially female athletes, the hormonal changes that a female athlete goes through on a monthly basis can completely derail any kind of plans that you put in, and it's way, way better to be somewhat in tune. You'll never completely understand what they're going through and how they're feeling, but kind of, being very attentive to where they're at emotionally and adjusting what you're doing depending on that is so important for just having that good relationship with athletes.
No, I learned that what you're talking about being flexible. I literally learned that yesterday. That I was like, I'm going to be super organized. First week of training, plan my sessions for the week. Definitely think we serve and pass, right? Like, women's volleyball serving is so important. Like, we'll smash that. And then we trained, and when we played 6-on-6 at the end, like, the serving was good, but like no one could kill a ball. And I was like, oh, okay, no, that's gone out the window. We need to work on attacking. So I'm like, that was not a waste of time, right? But like, I've just replanned today's session based entirely on yesterday, right? That like, okay, now I've got my priorities for this team backwards. But
a lot of people do with women's volleyball. It's funny, people talk about it being a serve and pass game. It's definitely a serving game now at the top level. Less a passing game, more of an offensive game.
I was going to come to the story. So I was listening yesterday, actually, on the way back from training to where I think you talked about this on your last podcast from the on the FIVB course, and like it was really interesting. Firstly, just the stats, right? You were saying that it's attack efficiency is like the best single predictor of winning a set, which makes sense because people get better in defense, and now it's the transition ball, not the side out ball. But the follow up question, apart from just, well, actually, yeah, I'll come to that in a minute. Like, just how is that impacting how you're training then? Like, are you just spending? Is it just a percentage of time? More time is spent on transition plays than it is side out plays, or?
Yeah, I think it's getting the idea into the athlete's head that this isn't a serve and pass game necessarily anymore. It's a game about winning points. Right? How do you win points? You win points by serving well, you win points by attacking well and blocking well. Right? If you do those three things, that's how you score in the game. So that's what we're going to practice a lot of, and we're going to be really focused on practicing. When we practice attack, we're practicing swinging to the areas that are going to score. We're practicing going off the side of hands because that's the easiest way to score. We're practicing or playing matches and 6v6 games where you have a limited number of attacks per team in each point, because that ramps up the pressure on that attacker to put the ball away. And when we looked at it, and it was Freddie at Nottingham who ran these numbers for me, about 1.8 attacks per point. So on average, you're only going to get one attacking opportunity in each point as a team. So we're going to play a lot of that this year, where the point's over after two swings or two attacking opportunities, and that's where you have your opportunity to score. And if you don't score, cool, we move on. And I think that's going to ramp up some of the pressure on the setters to make good decisions. It's going to ramp up pressure on the attackers to actually put the ball away and take swings that are risky swings. But we've also seen in the game that attack efficiency, counter-attack efficiency, serving ability, they're the three key elements to play in the game right now. So if you're not focusing on those, you're losing out opportunities to win.
Yeah, and that's different in women's, right? Like, it's not, because that's one of the big things I wanted to talk to you about, is all my experience of volleyball at this sort of level of like semi-pro-ish is from playing, and obviously playing men's. So like I'm conscious of like, I don't want to just try and coach the women to be like the teams I played in as a man, because there's these ways where like you get serving's more important, right? Like in women's volleyball, for example, or I'm assuming then side out similarly is more important in men's, and it's less about transition.
Yeah, so the men's game's slightly ahead of the women's game in terms of cycles. So the men's game kind of went for a cycle 5 or 6 years ago where servers were dominating receivers, and the receivers have kind of caught up a little bit. We went into the last Olympics, and side out rate and reception rate was super important in the men's game, whereas say the women are about 5 or 6 years behind that in that they're just now serving at a level that's taken it past the passers. So the passers haven't caught up yet in terms of that high, hard driven float serve or the hybrid serves that are really in vogue now in the women's game. So, being able to serve well is a key component. Eventually the passers will catch up and they'll get to a point where again it flips back and side out's super important. So I think a lot of it depends on your league. And is there really good serving teams? Are there really good serving teams in your league? And if you are one of the better serving teams in your league, you can expect to get opportunities to play on that second touch, or get that second swing, that counter swing. So, that's a really, really important thing to be practicing. Now, if you're not a team that's great at serving, then you've got to side out really, really well, because you're not going to create those break points. Or if you're not a great serving team, your middle blockers have got to be really, really good at getting from pin to pin and taking the opposition middle for you to get really good breakpoint opportunities. And that's how you're going to kind of build to win the set. So what I would say is the women's game is probably not as different to the men's game tactically as you're used to. The men's game is kind of evolving, and the women's game's evolving into what the men's game was 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. And I guess you're still seeing the same sort of patterns though, or like, I don't know, things like playing, just generally obviously playing faster, right? There's always a push to play faster, but more things like, outside hitters using the block way more, or maybe outside hitters setting instead of the libero, so you can play with like more offensive options and so on. Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming these things carry over, I guess, from men's to women's as well, even if they're not super common yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think the back row, quick back row attack is coming into the women's game massively. You're seeing a lot of that now at the World Champs. Watch Ishikawa from Japan. She's just flying through in that rotations where she's in the back row. And the speed element has kind of always been there in the women's game. But now you're seeing the nations that didn't ever play fast before are starting to play fast. Poland, you've got Aja Volosh as your starting setter. She's the best setter in the world. Yes, you're going to play fast, but also you've got athletes that have grown up not playing fast, suddenly are not playing high ball on the pin anymore. They're running tempo, and they're 6'4". So it's a scary part. I'd say if you can build the tempo in, it's such a killer to work with, especially at that level. Like, that's going to win you points on its own. It's going to put your attackers in such great spots that they're going to be able to play and score. In terms of playing off the block, it opens up the whole court. It kind of flips the scoring area. We talk a lot about flipping the scoring area when you go off hands. So if you're going to kill the ball clean, you've got to do it in the 9x9 on the other side. Right? If you have the opportunity to go up and go off hands, suddenly, as long as that ball doesn't land in your 9x9 box, you're scoring. So you've got a much, much bigger area from which you can score. It's a much quicker ball to score on. If you get the opportunity to swipe off the block into the antenna, that's an easy point. There's no defender's got the opportunity to play that. And that element, as I say, is coming in less so than in the men's game. It's not quite as, use my words carefully here, catch and throw as the men's game is at the top level now, where they seem to be able to just hang in the air, grab the ball and direct it however they want. Physiologically, female athletes don't hang in the air quite as long as male athletes do. So it's a lot more about going fast and playing quick off the block in those moments. But hitting high is one of the biggest things we're bringing in, or I'm going to be bringing in this year. So rather than this idea of trying to bounce the ball all the time, I'm going to try and contact the ball 2 bits of the antenna above the height of the net. and suddenly I'm hitting on the top of the hands of the block rather than trying to hit low. We talk a lot about no low seam. Americans especially love hitting the ball low into the seam between the two blockers. Europeans love blocking low into the seam between the two blockers. So we talk about not hitting low seam and trying to hit high into the hands and deep into the court. And I think that's a big thing right now. You watch Bella Hack from Sweden going out and playing at the World Championships right now. She's 6'4". She touches 330, I think. Yeah, she can go down up and over the top of pretty much any block that's there, and she hits the ball deep into the last meter of court all the time. And that's such a cheat code because it's so hard to go up and block someone that big hitting that deep. And that's kind of some of the tactical elements that are around right now and pushing a lot more in.
I remember
in the
when
sport,
playing against a few of the guys in Sweden that were up high enough to go clean over the top of like the block like that, about a meter into court. It was the most I've ever been shouted at for like just not going for the ball, because I would be stood in 6 defending, and in my head that bit of court was inaccessible to the ball because of blocks there. So I don't think about that as what I have to take. Big block touch, go backwards. If they hit it at me, I'm here. If they tip it, I go there, and that's it. And then the ball lands there and I didn't move. And I'm like, but how? What? That shouldn't. Yeah. So if you can get athletes up to that height, and obviously it's always relative to the block. So it's not like you have to be as well hard to be able to do that. You can do that at your level if you can get up above the block and take your spike reach up, like you say. But I mean, speaking of the differences then between men's and women's volleyball, what about the technical tactical bits in terms of like the culture of the team, like man management? Have you found that? Because I think you coach mostly with women, right? But like, well, obviously as a man, like you maybe more attuned to, you're mentally going to be thinking like, how I don't want to go too binary. So men think like this, women think like this. Obviously it's not that simple, but there are differences, right, in how you'd approach a group of female versus male athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I try to be a lot more collaborative coaching female athletes. I think there's that element, and there's a little bit of generalization here. So I apologize if you're not like this as a female volleyball athlete. There's a little bit more of an understanding, or a want for an understanding of why we're trying to do things. And I think if you can illustrate that, you get a lot more buy-in a lot quicker. I think caring about who they are as a person and what they have going on outside of volleyball is massively important. And then I think, especially as a man coaching female athletes, being really consistent in who you are emotionally and your own emotional regulation. So, yeah, we talk about it a lot, and I talk about it a lot with the athletes, and anyone who's ever been on a recruitment call with me that's listening to this now will laugh. I lose my rag probably once a year, maybe twice. Twice is very rare, but once a year I won't be able to control something that's happening outside the court, and I'll come in and someone will do something that just sets me off. Right? And very, very quickly I will notice it and apologize. And I think because it's out of character for me, a lot of our senior athletes now know, right, something's happened outside, and we can sort of calm the rest of the group down and move forward. And I think that only works, and they're very, very forgiving if you do it once, if you're very consistent the rest of the time. So again, I will try and say consistently put in as much effort as possible to get to know them, be very kind of placid in who I am, and I try to be quite high energy in matches, less so in practices. I like our practice environment to actually be quite calm. We've been very lucky. We've had a lot of North Americans that bring a lot of very good energy into the practice environment anyway. But the more you can kind of put on them to control the environment, the better that environment's going to be. And give them the space to kind of create and feel safe, and everything else. The more safe they feel, the more likely they are to express themselves and play really, really good volleyball.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Like, No, especially I think what you say about the people understanding why, that resonates a lot with me. That's been my experience. That I feel like oftentimes the men's teams I've been in have responded, as long as what you ask to do isn't obviously stupid, then you can kind of tell them to do anything, and they're just sort of like excitedly just like, yeah, let's go and do it. Like, that sounds fun. And they'll just run off. And not that doesn't happen obviously with women, but there's definitely more of like a desire for understanding. You can see like that click when you're like, you explain the drill, and I can see often like you say, okay, I'm going to do it, and it's because this, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, like, yeah, I know I've got them now, everyone's happy, we're all on the same page. And what about with like because this relates also to what I was thinking about with the guys talking about in Sweden who got dropped from the team because sort of attitude related problems, like, and you talk about obviously sometimes you lose your rag and stuff, like with responses to aggression generally. Like I remember growing up, like the coach who like started me on volleyball, Thomas Morawski, he's obviously based in Essex, and he was like, he coached all of the boys and the girls, all of us in Norwich growing up, and he would like scream his head off at the boys, like every day. He was quite a shouty coach, and we obviously is all we knew, so we were used to it. And then we watched him coach the East girls, and he did like a normal thing, like I think someone just dug a free ball out, and he like screamed at them. He was like, "How could you miss? Unforgivable!" And they burst out crying because they're like a 15-year-old girl. And then he was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. You're right to get upset. That was really bad of me. I'm really sorry." And we're like, "What is going on? What do you mean he apologized for shouting at him? That's not how it works. He just shouts more." But yeah, we were chatting to him about like, what Thomas, what are the differences then? Like, why do you coach us differently? And obviously it's because you're different people, but that really stuck with me then, that like you have to approach these things, especially it seemed like getting angry, but like generally it's been the case to me that guys respond a bit better to a bit more of a testosterone filled, like, what on earth are you doing, like raised voice. And that, obviously some men hate that. Like, I don't really like it as a player, to be honest myself. Like, I kind of shy away from it. And obviously some women love it. If you scream at them, they'll get fired up. But
they say they love it, but actually when it happens, the emotional response afterwards is not great, usually. I don't see it as a positive thing ever. Like when it happens to me once a year, I that's a failure on my part. That's nothing positive on my part. I think you need to be able to use some emotion, but I think taking as much of the emotion out of it as possible is really, really positive. Some of the you have to be a bit careful when you watch international teams, because the cultures are very, very different, right? And slight stereotyping internationally. You watch the Italians play; they're very, very emotional, and their coaches are pretty emotional in how they coach the team, and that's kind of just known. You kind of know that when you have an Italian coach there. Brazilians are very, very similar, right? Bernardino, he will scream at an athlete, and the athletes will kind of maybe give him a little bit back, but that's their gym, that's their environment, that's the culture that they've grown up in a little bit more. So you have to know your group really well, and say working with English athletes, this placid, supportive environment is absolutely what they need when they come in, as opposed to anything else. I would imagine that the athletes in the Nordic countries are probably very similar in that environment. Americans definitely are. Some of them will have grown up with some awful coaches that scream and emotionally manipulate them. There's plenty of those out there. There's plenty of great coaches in the US as well, but there's plenty of awful ones. And I think that safe space just gives them that ability. And if they know what they're getting every day, and that's consistent, then that's such a positive.
So do you think, like,
going forward?
I'm interested with this, like, to what, because I've not really worked this out for myself as a player, let alone as a coach. Like, what is the role, if any, for like negative emotion in sport? Like, say for example, a ball drops and everyone just stands and watches it hit the floor and no one dives for it, right? Or something you've set as an expectation that's like that, and and that happens 2, 3, 4 times, let's say, and you think it's because people, I don't know, they've not woken up today or whatever it's, do you think then it's positive to go in and be quite pissed and be like, in a stern voice, guys, come on, not good enough, like step it up as a player or as a coach? Or do you think better to try to take the emotion out of it and have a conversation about why does it happen and stuff, or a bit of both? Like,
I think there's some room for it, because it's a natural thing to feel. It's not something that's unnatural, and I think that. But you have to have had the conversations beforehand about processing those emotions. So we sit down in pre-season a lot and talk about how we want to be spoken to, right? And people will give different answers to that, but it's really, really important to understand what the group and how the group wants to be spoken to and how individuals want to be spoken to. I think we shouldn't be labeling emotions in athletes as bad, because that just restricts what they can do and how they can feel. Now, if you've got an athlete that's getting angry a lot, it's probably worth a one-on-one conversation to say, look, is this emotion helping you, and is it helping the team? And is there a way that you can, because it could be that they get really angry and they still can play quite well through it, and the team can play quite well through it. Now, if that's the case, you kind of have to have a conversation with everyone and be like, are we good? If we're good, then we keep going. If it's disrupting the team, then you've got to have that conversation of, right, this isn't working and this emotion is negatively impacting you. How can you notice it, feel it, and then not let it affect you?
It sounds very meditative.
And that it is, and there's a lot of that. And then the higher up the game you go, the more the mental side of the game and practicing the mental side of the game becomes super important. A lot of the top, especially the top men's athletes, they're so laid back, they're almost horizontal about stuff, and they do it in different ways. And this is not just USA or England. There's a Russian guy. So I was chatting to Cody Kessel, who's an American playing out in Germany right now. And Cody speaks about this. He speaks about being obsessed with stats, right? And super smart guy, went to Princeton, played volleyball at Princeton. And he was obsessed with the stats. And at every practice at Princeton, they'd get the stats from their technical advisor afterwards, and he'd obsess over them. Goes to play professionally, does exactly the same thing. He's obsessing. He's in a bit of a slump. He's obsessing over the bad numbers in practice. And there was a Russian guy on his team. And the Russian guy playing really, really well, super experienced. Cody goes up and asks him, how do you get by when you have a bad game looking at the stats? And the Russian guy goes, I never look at the stats. I just play. And I think the higher you go up the levels, almost it looks like the less they care.
Yeah.
But they care in different ways. Right? They care by turning up every day to lifting in the gym. They turn up every day to practice, ready to go, intentional about how they're going to play and what they're going to do. And I think that if you're a young player, show you care by your actions, not by your emotions. And that's a big sort of step. And we go through that with first years coming in to our program, in that they want to prove themselves really quickly. They want to show they care as much as everyone else who they think is finding it easy but isn't finding it easy. And I think that's a big first step, is that, look, show you care with your actions, not your emotions.
With that's definitely something I've noticed myself, like that the more I've played and the higher the level I've played at, the more I've appreciated that the thing that separates the best players is the mental game. Because even just running a trial, right? Like you can look at all these people and see how good their technical skills are, see they're really physical. And this how used to happen to me all the time. It's actually when we used to play tendering as juniors. It was the first time. I remember Thomas pointed this out, that they were the biggest. We'd always play, Norwich would play Boswell's and tendering in the first round of the National Cup. And tendering were always the biggest team. And we would look at them and just we'd be like, well, we've lost. They're enormous. And then we'd usually beat tendering and lose to Boswell's, because Boswell's were the better drill. They're the better players. But it was the same lesson then that it is now, that obviously not just, it's all good and well, bouncing the ball in the hitting warm up. But then can you actually do that when you're match point down and you get set and you've got to beat the double block or something? Or do you panic and hit it, versus the small guy who's an unbelievably good clutch player. And like, it's really hard. But it's definitely recently running a trial, it's very hard to test for that. I find like you need time to see it, or at least I struggle at least to construct a drill where I could assess that in one session sort of thing. I think you quite quickly figure it out when you have a bit of time with people. I mean, if you have any ideas, I'm all ears, because like I struggle to work this out with people.
So I think the biggest thing that people talk about not being able to train clutch or train people to be good under pressure. And I think they go about it the wrong way. To be good under pressure, you got to train under pressure. You got to be in that environment as much as possible. Now, the only environment that's pressure filled is one that you care about. So for me, it's about creating games and creating little rivalries in practice, and I let my athletes talk shit to one another through the net all the time. I don't step in. I want them to compete, and I want them to have that desire to win in practice every day. Now we make sure after practice that they go and clear the air if any air needs to be cleared. But in practice, it's okay to have a little bit of aggressiveness, because that creates the pressure that's there. Now, I like using scoring to create pressure. So again, putting people 3 points down, 4 points down, making it so that when it gets to 23-all, they have to win 2 in a row to win the set, or they drop back points. Like those little things, making everything have a stake on it. Limiting the number of swings per point. All of that creates pressure, and I think the more binary outcomes you can have, either you win or you lose, the more the pressure starts to come in, and the more they practice and train under that pressure, the more likely they are to be okay with it in game. But it should be built into everything that you do, and that is how you build it up. There shouldn't be, I'm going to call it mindless repetition in your practices. There should always be a pressure to do something well, and I think that's one of the things that we're missing in our sport, especially in the junior development in our sport in England, is that a lot of it is choreographed.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of playing the game. And if there is playing the game, there's no consequences on playing the game. And I'm not talking about making people do 1 million press-ups for losing, but you can, if it's player-led, it's a little bit easier to do that. I don't like it when it's coach-led, but this idea that it has to mean something, winning and losing. So, for me, it might be, and this is more of a pro thing when people are getting paid a lot of money. Teams putting €50 on the whiteboard and saying, right, whoever has the most kills in this game, you get to go and rip the €50 note off the whiteboard. Now, these people are earning way more money than anyone on this call is. So I'm not saying if you're not paid that you have to go and start shelling out loads of money, but finding different ways to motivate and make it so that everything matters, and that's important. And like I say, limiting time, limiting as much as you can in that to make it harder, to make it seem
I really like
it's
the
tough
phrase used
in
when
that
you talk
moment.
about that, like, pressure is because you care. Right, that helps to like try and single in. Okay, well, how do you make people care, and what do they care about? And I feel like that's where you can get really creative with coaching, to try and come back. Okay, well, I want to work on serving under pressure because we're not good at it, or we want to be better at it. So how do I create a drill where they care about the outcome, or the like? Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I definitely will try that. Because I mean, I did that a lot. Like the juniors actually in Leeds, they really love that. Like just doing a game like, I don't know, you've got to hit 5 serves as an individual, just 5 serves in a row, like with some minimum level. You can't just hit 5 underarm serves, right? It's got to be a decent jump float serve or something. But otherwise, that's the stipulation. And then I said, and you guys can choose the forfeit. And they had a field day with like, okay, it's 50 push-ups and then 10 dives and then like 5 laps and like. But then they were so excited to do this drill, especially because they had a bit of agency in setting it up. It worked really well.
Yeah, I agree. Right, I think we're coming pretty close to the end of what we have time for today. It's been a really, really great Really, really great to sit down and chat, and we'll definitely pick it up again in the future. We'll check in and see how your season's going out in Denmark. Just before we go, do you want to plug your YouTube channel? Because I know there's some
Yeah,
really good
gladly. Yeah,
content on
on
there for
YouTube,
people that want to follow
and
the
Instagram,
journey.
George Frazer VB. I've got stuff on, following my life, playing volleyball, coaching abroad, and coaching. Similarly, online coaching. If you want to improve and you want to have access to a coach like Alex, and you want to get some feedback and so on, then shoot me a message.
Nice. Sounds good. George is just the latest in a great line of guests that we've had on this show. And like I'm saying, I'm planning some fantastic things for the next couple of months. Just checked back in with a really, really great guest for the next guest episode in a couple of weeks' time. Make sure you follow along, you subscribe on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and I will continue to bring you great content throughout the season on what it looks like to be a professional coach in this sport. George, thank you very much for joining us
Thank you very
today,
much. You
and
too.
all the best for your season out in Denmark.